Alright YouTube, welcome back. This is part 2 of 4 of the basics for rifle marksmanship instruction. I need to point out a couple of things before we begin. First of all, you're never going to learn to shoot entirely by watching videos. However, the basic marksmanship instruction portion is classroom in the military. I know I've taught hundreds of people to shoot. Sorry while I adjust my logo. It's always off center, either that or I am. But you can learn the essentials. In fact, anytime you go to the range, it should be preceded by a good amount of study and research, including researching a little bit about the range you're going to go to. It's a civilian range. See if they have had some bad incidents there, or if they have a good shooting record. Best thing to do is find yourself a friend who has been shooting a lot, and they'll know a good range to go to. You're going to have to do some actual range training with some instruction, with somebody there that knows a little bit of what they're doing so that you can be safe. In the interim, and before you go there, to make sure that your time is the most effective and most productive, watch these videos, and that'll give you a good starting point. We're going to cover these 4, which are the fundamentals about things like sight alignment, sight picture, trigger squeeze, eye relief, and more. But when you go to the range, you're also going to have worked on your shooting positions. There's a lot to this, and when you do all of these things before you go to the range, you're going to find very effective time on the range, and then you're going to do some realistic shooting. You're going to be able to hit targets effectively and consistently, even when under pressure. I know that these techniques work. I've not only taught them and seen them work in others, they work for me, and I've used them in combat. That's right, I didn't have to leave behind a bunch of things that I learned in the classroom when I went out there and actually got shot at. I actually used brass, breathe, relax, aim, stop, squeeze. I used trigger control. I used all of those things to engage targets. And it works. And I believe many of you out there that have been in combat can attest to the same. All right, folks, watch and learn and comment. I love hearing from you and knowing your thoughts, your feelings, your observations on the training to know if it's effective. As an instructor, I need after-action reports. I need reviews. I need to know if I'm being effective, if you're learning from me, or if not. It helps me to help you and also to do a good job, and that's what I'm all about. Thank you, folks. Enjoy the videos. Grab a cup of coffee. Pause the video, go get some coffee. Enjoy yourselves. All right, see you back. All right, in this next section, we're going to look at something real quick. It's individual movement technique, and they talk about shooting irregular shaped targets. Once you got your zero down, I recommend that we switch over to irregular shaped targets, man silhouette, essentially. But if we're trying to get our sight alignment, sight picture issue resolved, and also get our weapons zeroed, which we will talk about later on, we want to make sure that we understand this. Now you can practice the shooting positions and everything else without having your zero done on your weapon. In fact, in the Marine Corps, before you put a single rifle through your round, you have spent about 40 hours snapping in on the shooting positions I'm going to show you, and this works. So please, I know I have people that will get confused on this. You can practice. Now if your sights are all jacked up and you have your rear sight aperture all the way to the left, jammed up against the far end, and your front sight post is all the way down, or it's falling out of the weapon, it's so far up. Yes, you'll probably want to put 15 clicks of right wind and 15 clicks of elevation on there, but normally they come from the factory with about that on. I recommend, by the way, on your sights, don't mess with them until you have put 3 rounds through it accurately, consistently from a bench or a good shooting position, because sometimes the person that had it before you already zeroed it, and most people have kind of the same zero. Now, of course, there's always exceptions to every rule, so please don't point out the exception and the anecdote as proof positive that this is not an accurate statement. It is accurate. I have qualified and trained hundreds of people to shoot. I know at least one thing about that. So don't get confused. But watch the IMT, this Marine. Now understand, he's moving like Stealthy Joe. When you're out walking and you're patrolling your area to keep it safe from bad guys, looters, rapists, murderers and such, you want to make sure you understand something. There's movement to contact, which is a bit more pronounced, like he is doing. And then there's just basic patrolling, which is a modified and slightly relaxed position of the way he's carrying his weapon. Muzzle down, scanning left and right, weapon moving with his body naturally. He seems to be a little too sneaky Pete because he anticipates he smelled a bad guy in the area. His sensors were kicking in, his spider senses. And your spider senses will kick in. You won't know what they are or why they're doing it, but when they do, it might be a good indicator or what the FBI calls a clue that you should be ready. Don't ever ignore your sensors when they're screaming at you to do something. So watch in this next one, and then we're going to get into stock weld.
Because in combat, targets are often indistinct and oddly shaped, the center mass hold is used because it provides a consistent aiming.
All right, stock weld, that is where your face goes on the stock of the weapon. And that's why it's important, if you have especially collapsible stock, that's all right. Just try not to keep moving it back and forth when you're trying to get your zero. Leave it in one place, and once you know where that is, and you should find that out when we do our snapping in down on the floor here in Fort Living Room, you'll want to find a way to mark that off. Now for me, mine tends to be with the tip of my nose up against the charging handle. For you, you may be back, just depends on how big your head is and your face. You may be back a little. If you're having a problem remembering where it is and your face is not up there on the charging handle, your nose rather, or someplace that you know exactly where it is each and every single time, I used to take a piece of tape. There's two things you can do. When you're using Uncle Sam's weapons, you're not allowed to put a scratch in there. If it's yours, you may want to take your Leatherman or whatever, saw a little tiny notch into the stock, and that way you'll know that little scratchy spot needs to touch a certain spot in your face. The other one is, I used to take a BB or a little pebble or something similar and a piece of 100-mile-an-hour tape, and I put that underneath the tape. I put the BB on the back side of the tape and lay that up on the shooter's stock, so that every time they can feel that BB, and I tell them, make sure every time your BB is touching the same place when you do that. So pay attention to stock weld on here, and they'll explain it in further detail, and they talk about having your head up. Don't confuse that with prairie dogging and making it so that you have to stand in the position of attention. They're just talking about don't turn your head down. You can be crouched down, and I do that. I'm wrapped behind my weapon. I went into my shooting position, but my head is not pointed down at the ground. It is pointed straight down the sights. So pay attention to that part, but don't get confused, because some people will think that I mean we need to stand up and prairie dog over the top. The more of your body you expose to the enemy, the greater your chance for failing this mission. All right. Let's pay attention now to stock weld.
Stock weld is the point of firm contact between your cheek and the stock of the rifle. Your head should be as erect as possible to enable the aiming eye to look straight through the rear sight aperture. If the position of the Marine's head causes him to look across the bridge of the nose or out from under the eyebrow, the eye will be strained. The eye functions best in its natural forward position. Changing the placement of your cheek up or down on the stock from shot to shot may affect the zero on the rifle due to your perception of the rear sight aperture.
All right, eye relief is the next thing we're going to talk about. Now, I'm going to stop here for just a second because eye relief is also important when you use your scope, believe it or not. Now, with your scope, and those of you that shoot scope weapons know, if you get up too close, you start seeing these little black clouds around the edge. And if you get real close, like I did one time, and I put the scope right up here, you get what's called scope bite. That's when the rifle recoil pushes the scope back into your skull, and your skull is not designed for a scope to hit it, especially above the eyebrow, and that makes it hard to finish out the week's shooting. And that was my introduction to scoped weapons, was it bit me. So pay attention to eye relief as well, though, because the stock weld is important. The further back you are, it changes your position, your eye relief. It does change also your sight alignment, sight picture, which in turn changes your ability to hit the target and greatly increases your chance of a miss. So watch carefully about eye relief.
A consistent and proper stock weld is critical to the aiming process because it provides consistency in eye relief, which affects the ability to align the sights. Eye relief is the distance between the rear sight aperture and the aiming eye. Normal eye relief is 2 to 6 inches from the rear sight aperture. It is different for every Marine. The distance between the aiming eye and the rear sight aperture depends on the size of the Marine and the firing position. While eye relief varies from one position to another, it is important to have the same eye relief for all shots fired from a particular position. If your eye is too close to the rear sight aperture, it will be difficult to line up the front sight post in the rear sight aperture. Moving your eye back from the rear sight aperture will make the aperture appear smaller and allow the tip of the front sight post to be easily lined up inside the rear sight aperture. However, if your eye is too far from the rear sight aperture, it will be difficult to acquire the target and to maintain a precise aiming point.
Okay, did you notice in that last one, when they started pulling back, there's a point where you'll start to see, and do this, put your weapon in your shoulder and slowly get good sight line of sight picture and slowly start sliding your face back along the stock. And you will notice as you do this that suddenly at one point, this is your rear sight aperture, you'll start to see this black kind of fuzzy cloud go in there. Right about the time you start to see that fuzz, that's exactly where you want to be. By the way, your rear sight aperture has two holes in it, if you will. It's an L-shaped device, and you click it this way and this way. You want to flip it forward, the front down like that, towards the enemy, usually, unless you've got some bizarre sight system. You want the small hole. Look through the small hole. The great big one is for shooting with protective mask. That way, because you can have really bizarre eye relief, because like with a pro mask on in the military, I can't put my nose up there because there's a giant canister over here and a big rubberized face piece in the way. So I'm going to be back a bit, and that's what that's for. You understand that the rifle's going to be further back in your shoulder away. Your face is going to be far away from where it really needs to normally be. So watch. In this next one, we're going to talk about acquiring targets, and pay attention to how they show sight alignment, sight picture now being added to our training.
The human eye can only focus clearly on one object at a time. When the shot is fired, focus must be on the tip of the front sight post. Secondary focus will include the rear sight and the target. The rear sight and target will appear blurry.
All right, now we're going to get into shooting positions and a little bit of target acquisition. And you'll notice in here they talk about a sequence. And that sequence is to acquire the target with your eyes and then bring the weapon up. When we get into natural point of aim, I want you to remember this. He also talks about being able to put the weapon in his shoulder. You'll notice this is pre-body armor days, and he's not even shooting with an LBE. That's something the Army does. The Marine Corps doesn't. The Marine Corps focuses on shooting and training in a little bit different fashion. The Army tries to put all of your shooting into one economical package so that you do it all in one day with 18 rounds for 0 and 40 rounds to qualify. The Marine Corps scoffs and mocks at this notion, as they should. They believe that marksmanship is a science, and you first qualify in a very scientific fashion, in a very controlled manner, and then you go do live fire exercises building upon that. The Army seems to have lost that, and it seems to be more about saving money. I'm speaking pragmatically and frankly because I have been both a Marine and a soldier. That's right, I served my time in the Marine Corps, received my honorable discharge, and then I went over to the Army. And I was very appalled the first time I went to an Army rifle range and we fired at how little focus they placed upon so key a concept and fundamental skill, if you will. And this was airborne infantry, no less, that put less focus on it than the average Marine rifleman. And I'm not trying to throw the Army under the bus. I'm just pointing out when there's something wrong. Not everybody's perfect. Not every system is perfect. So take it for what it is. In this next video, you're going to see, though, he puts his eyes on the target, then brings the weapon up. What you don't want to do is ride the sights and try to acquire targets. Shoot this one and then stay on the sights over here. You have to do something to quickly acquire the target. Unless you're at one of these ridiculous ranges where everything is a giant target and you know exactly where the next target is, and so you can game it. Don't game your training. You're just going to game yourself into getting shot. So pay attention as he does this, as he puts the weapon in his shoulder. Don't pay too much attention because as he's placing the stock in, you may be thinking, wow, I don't have that divot there with my body armor. That's okay. Sometimes I'll put a first aid pouch or something up here, something that'll catch the end of it, but I know exactly where it goes, and that's why that little rubberized piece on the back side of your stock sometimes is more than just a cushion for sniveling. It's actually a good piece of gear to keep that stock from sliding over your slippery nylon gear. So pay attention, and we'll be right back.
Proper stock weld and placement of the butt of the rifle in the shoulder aids in establishing sight alignment quickly. The rifle butt's placement in the shoulder serves as the pivot point for presenting the rifle upward to a fixed point on the cheek. A Marine will look at the target as the rifle is presented. As the rifle sights become level with the aiming eye, a Marine visually locates the target through the rear sight aperture. As the rifle settles, a Marine's focus shifts back to the front sight post to place the tip of the post on the target.
All right, I think that's a good place to stop right there. Sight alignment, sight picture we've covered in the earlier video. Today we talked a bit more about eye relief. We're going to talk also, we talked a bit about natural point of aim. We're going to talk more about that in shooting positions will be mentioned, as well as trigger controls. Tell you 2 types of trigger control are going to be mentioned in the next video coming up. And let's see, you may be looking at this and going, wait a minute, this is very stationary. I want to learn to shoot, move, and communicate. I want to learn all that high-speed stuff. We will, but first you have to learn these fundamentals. You have to learn to shoot your iron sights. You have to learn to be a good marksman. You have to learn to be able to hit your target from a stationary position. And from there, we'll move on and build. This is a fundamental concept that we have to have under our belt. We need to master this. And the great thing is, a lot of the stuff that you are seeing, you can practice this. Some of you smarter ones have already said, I can do this at home. I can do this from my from Fort living room here on the carpet in front of the television where I'm watching YouTube. Hopefully you're not watching regular TV. That's bad for you. That's harmful, bad for your health. Safety warning, right? Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about trigger control, natural point of aim, etc. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good evening. Enjoy yourself. And when we come back, there will be coffee waiting in the break room. Bye.